Welcome to Puzzles and Solutions. On Friday the 18th, I published a self-made puzzle which you can see here as puzzle number 1 on the left side. I wanted to create a short video explaining this puzzle, but I decided to include 2 other puzzles which I also made. Before going through the puzzles, I would just like to say, if you can't solve a puzzle, don't feel bad about it. It's most likely just my fault for creating a bad puzzle. I will go through the puzzles now. Remember to pause at the start of every puzzle and try to solve it yourself before listening to my solution. Puzzle number 1. I shared this puzzle on Twitter and YouTube, and a lot of people seem to be able to solve it, so I think the puzzle is pretty good. First, I will go through how a friend solved this puzzle, and then I will go through how the puzzle fundamentally works. My friend told me that he focused on the 2x2 square in the bottom right. Here we can easily see in the first row that this 2x2 square is rotated by 90 degrees clockwise, followed by a color change. Red becomes blue, blue becomes green, green becomes yellow, and yellow becomes red. To make the rotation pattern more obvious, I will do the color change for the first column. The rotation should be obvious now between the first and the second picture in any row. But it's not obvious between the second and the third picture, so I will do a second color change. I will do the color change for both the first and the second column. We can clearly see the rotation pattern in the rows now. To go from the first to the second picture or the second to the third, we just rotate this 2x2 grid by 90 degrees clockwise. So to solve the puzzle, we go by the second picture in the third row, and then rotate this 2x2 square by 90 degrees clockwise. This produces a picture identical to answer D. Answer D is the correct solution. So that was how my friend solved the puzzle, but let's go through how the puzzle fundamentally works. First of all, the color change was 100% correct, but he didn't really have an explanation for the rest of the squares, other than the 2x2 grid in the bottom right. To make it easier to see the pattern, let's do the color change in the first and the second column. Remember that there is 2 times color change in the first column, and 1 time color change in the second column. I will use the change between the first and the second picture as an example for how to go between the pictures. First, we rotate the entire picture by 90 degrees clockwise. When we have this picture, we move every square once towards the right, and notice that the third column moves in this pattern. So the top right moves to the middle left, the middle right moves to the bottom left, and the bottom right moves to the top left. Following this pattern, for the second picture in the third column, we get answer D as the correct solution. Puzzle number 2. Remember to pause the video and give the puzzle an attempt. I think this is a pretty easy puzzle, but I made it to experiment with a new pattern. Before explaining the puzzle, I just have to quickly go through what a linear puzzle is. Here we have some examples of a linear puzzle from the Mensa New Zealand IQ test. So the linear puzzles feature some sequence of images with a single transition in between them. Now we could disguise a linear puzzle as a matrix puzzle by just putting a linear sequence of images in some order in a matrix. An example of this would be puzzle 37 from the Mensa Denmark IQ test. This is a linear puzzle which occurs in the order picture 1, 2, 3. Then we have this connection from the right side of the first row to the left side of the second row. Picture 4, 5, 6, connection, and picture 7, 8, 9. So instead of imagining this puzzle as a matrix, you could just imagine a linear sequence of images and solve it from there. Going back to the puzzle I made, this is a linear puzzle, so it's a linear sequence of images which are just put together in a matrix. And in order to solve the puzzle, you have to figure out the order of the images. I decided to test this diagonal repetition, which works like this. We have picture 1, connection, picture 2 and 3, connection, picture 4, 5 and 6, connection, picture 7 and 8, connection, and picture 9. Hopefully someone was able to find this pattern and that the puzzle is actually solvable. If I remove these lines and we focus on the images, we can see that both the red and the blue square moves in one position towards the right as we move in this linear sequence of images. The 8th picture in the matrix is the last picture in the linear sequence, so moving the red and the blue square once towards the right leads to answer A. Answer A is the correct solution. Puzzle number 3. Remember to pause the video if you want and try it yourself. Starting off this puzzle, let's look at the red squares. There is no pattern in the rows, but if you look at the columns, we have an addition with cancellation. For example, in the first column, the two first pictures have these squares in common and these squares not in common. The yellow squares, which they have in common, are cancelled out, while the green squares, which they do not have in common, is carried over to the third picture. To solve the puzzle, we go by the third column. The two first pictures have these squares in common and these not in common. The yellow ones will cancel out, while the green ones will remain in the answer. So the answer will have a red square in the top left and middle left, as we can see in answer B. No other answers have these two red squares, so answer B is the correct solution. You don't really need to understand the pattern of the blue squares in order to solve the puzzle, but I will show it anyways. Adding the blue squares back in and removing the red squares, we have these blue squares. The blue squares also follow an addition with cancellation, but in the diagonals from top left to bottom right. For example, in the yellow diagonal, we have these squares in common, which will cancel out, and these squares not in common, which is carried over to the third picture of the diagonal. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you again in the next puzzle.